The words 38th Street in Minneapolis mean only one thing to most people: the place where George Floyd was murdered. But long before that, 38th Street was a vibrant, classy thoroughfare for African American culture and business. The 25-year-old Cultural Wellness Center, founded by Elder Atum Azahir, has a dream of recapturing that vibrant and proud history. Dreamland on 38th Street. In the past, it was a real place, and with your help, it can be again. I'm Don Shelby. I sit down with Anthony Taylor, one of Elder Atum's sons, to talk about what it could be again. We've talked a good deal, and I'm struck by how little, if any, we have used the term racism. But we can't escape the fact that racism has been at the center of harm from which African Americans are being asked to recover from the trauma. For my part, let me add that there's an astonishingly large portion of the European American community who want to see racism end and to face the truth first, then begin a reconciliation. It occurs to me that there seems to be a lot of white people where this idea of Dreamland would be just the kind of idea that they would support, a healing venture, not just for African Americans, but for the damage racism has caused to them, to us.
So stay with me because I can talk too long. What I will say is that that my mother would be proud of both of us, particularly because we're acknowledging this idea that there are people who are now called white, right? That they also have culture. And what they have done is actually walked away from that idea of culture. And that the idea of white supremacy is the system we're talking about. That in Powderhorn, Phillips, and Lake Street may be a great example of this. And we are actually working on something that's pretty exciting. We have a group of community members who are identified as white, who are going through a project at the Cultural Wellness Center called Race to Culture. And what they have been able to do is really march into this idea of what was the culture they walked away from, right? What were the values of that? How does that show up in their life values and how they lean into family, money, land? What is that about? And what we've done that is really interesting is given that community an opportunity to do exactly what you're saying. That we started out on a project that was looking at, community investment trusts. And when we really looked at this idea of community investment trusts of resources going back in the community, the question that we asked was, well, we live in a community that has really been majority white for a very long time. This Powderhorn community right over here. That in the early days, it was outliers and hippies and, that white people that were also a little outcast, a little on the edge, right? A little on the fringe. And they moved into this community because they could. And here they are 30 years later with more value than they thought. And how do we create a vehicle for them to invest in the community? So we worked with them and created a community investment trust where we're trying to allow them to organize the resources they own, they have, right? Talent and money, and invest in efforts inside of the geography of our community that does prioritize Black life, that does support immigrant communities, that does support women. That this idea of those resources flowing back into the community and still prioritizing the same things that we acknowledge have been harmed. So we're prioritizing marginalized communities with the resources that those who live in the community have. We have an opportunity to do that. We have an opportunity to do that all day long. And that is really what you're describing, this idea of repairing past harms, redistributing resources to people that we know, that we can see that live in our communities. And I think it is an opportunity for us. And it would make a tremendous difference if we did more of it.
Let's continue our tour down 38th in Chicago. What will we see? And let us in on the vision for the new world headquarters of the Cultural Wellness Center.
Well, 38th, so we started Lake in Chicago, and you can see the vitality on Lake Street. Lake Street was really a transportation thoroughfare. Chicago is also a major north-south thoroughfare. So that 5 bus line on Chicago is full of people. It's you can get out to Mall of America there, and you can get out to Brookdale on the 5, right? It's an amazing bus line. That what is happening as we drive away from Lake Street, though, and one of the things that we've started to look at and think about in terms of the data is looking at the ways communities change in smaller increments. 3 blocks, 6 blocks, 9 blocks, 12 blocks. We want to look at it that way. So as we walk south, we leave the vitality of Lake Street, and we have a little bit of, near Lake Street, you have a little, not a lot of homes, right? But you have a church, you've got, a business here. This is at 31st. You go one more block, and what you now start to see is a little more residential community. But the way that when we look inside of who lives there, what we find is that in terms of those quality of life measures, median household income is actually the lowest close to Lake Street, is the lowest when you live close to Lake Street. So this again represents something, right? So you go a little further down, just to 36th Street, and what we see is more homes. Pillsbury Theater is right here, and the median household income goes up just a little. It goes up maybe $3,000. So at Lake Street, we're looking at median income of roughly $30,000. That's less than 50% of the area mean income in the Twin Cities. You get to 38th Street, and on this drive where we're walking now, and we pass the Pillsbury, we come into George Floyd Square, and you immediately feel something. As you're walking, you're going to see all the names of African-American people that have been killed by police in the street. That this location has become an expression of all that pain, of all that trauma that community members experienced in those times. You walk a little further and you come to really the first place where you start to see the area where George Floyd's murder is marked off. On your right is a small coffee shop that has been turned over a couple times, but is now Black owned. Wing Young Huey's studio is here. So there again, the arts community is here. On your left, is the theater. And you are standing right smack dab in the spot where George Floyd was murdered. And you're standing in front of Cub Foods. And when people come here, it is amazing that so many people around the world have seen that image and cannot believe that they're standing there now. The Speedway that is now dubbed the People's Way is on your right. And you look around, and what you have to realize is you see this metal fist in the intersection of the corner. And I'm always reminding people, this was an organic community response. This was not organized. This was not an arts organization or an installation. This was an organic community response to carve this space off and to build this fist, this metal fist in the intersection. To begin the flowers, of course, the flowers began to come in on a daily basis. And immediately, again, the artists go to work. Community members organize themselves and start curating, dating, and saving the mementos of love that are left for George Floyd. It's just this community response, right, is really, and I have to say, overwhelming, because I was there the next day, and every day you see the infrastructure building. And as I'm standing here today, what I realize is we are standing at, again, a site that will become an international destination for social justice pilgrims from all over the world. And this was inspired by the community. When we walk a block west and we take a right, we come across another amazing experience called Say Their Name Cemetery. And again, this is an organic community response. 2 young women started, and they created headstones of the 100+ people that have been killed in police violence, police interactions. And they put the name, the date they died, when they were born, and the age which they were killed. And that looking through this is the most emotional experience that I've had at an installation.
You have a rather unique way of looking at those tombstones at that cemetery.
Yeah, all the credit to my mother and the Cultural Wellness Center is that they, through their work with doulas and babies and looking at birthing, they came up with rather than looking at average age of death or life expectancy, they came up with a number that they call years of potential life lost. And we calculated the years of potential life lost for the people who died there. And it was about 4,300 years of potential life. And again, we frame it in that regard to go, what could we create with 4,000 years of life? What could we discover? What disease could we cure?
All the ideas.
What music could we make? What art could we create with 4,000 years of life?
Who are these people going to become?
Who are these people going to become? What contribution will they make? And it is it is a way for us to really not just grieve their loss of life, but to grieve our loss of opportunity. It is a collective experience that we have to have every time we see something like this, every time we see a community member lost in any form of violence, that we have a collective loss.
It seems like the intersections on 38th Street and the major cross streets are barren of activity. Most vibrant communities and neighborhoods are anchored on all four corners by businesses: beauty parlor, a hardware store, restaurant, barbershop, small businesses, sometimes large. Those corners were once bustling in the days of Mr. Cash's. Where's it gone?
Yeah, it's something, and I think it didn't really, I bike, as you people know, so I'm all over the city, and what I noticed this in African American communities, and I noticed it here, and now I test this theory, is that at some point there's this response from municipalities where they will either take a corner out, right, and I think that urban planners talk about setbacks and how horrible those are for business on corner and Vitality, but there's going down 38th Street, you see this place where either corners are totally taken out or businesses set in, so there's a big setback. So there's no energy on the corner, no life on the corner. When you go down to 38th and 4th, that was the old business district, the center of the economic vitality. Two of the corners was taken out. One became a church. The other one became, again, a social service agency. And so what happens is you lose the vitality of that. You also lose a potential regeneration of that. Because for those of us who know 38th Street, if you go down 38th Street where the corners are intact, not at 4th, not at 3rd, not at 1st, you got 35W, but then at Nicollet, all four corners are intact. And what you have is energetic vitality for those corners. And then you go down to Bryant Avenue, and those corners are intact, and there's vitality. You go down to Lindale Avenue. What you see is this regeneration of business and opportunity that comes with the ability to turn those old retail locations into new retail locations, right? You see the same thing going east, down Bloomington, down Cedar, down 28th. I mean, it is something that we see all the time. And so I think, again, we think about things that have happened and ways the cities have responded to uprising or challenge. And again, we wind up with this situation where, keeping the ability for it to regenerate is a challenge.
Is there anything else you want to hit on that I failed to ask?
I think the biggest thing, always is that Lake Street has always been a place where people move for opportunity. And I think that is something that I really do believe to be the case. People moved here for opportunity. That it is the highest aspiration for communities is really opportunity. Mobility in the fact that they can chart their lives, that they can create for the future. When we talked to community, and we did a lot of conversations on Lake Street, the number one aspiration that people had was always for their children. It was never for now. And I just find that fundamentally amazing that when every community we talked to was looking at moving here for opportunity to create mobility for their children. And so communities are always thinking multi-generationally. I think that we think that that is not the case. I think that, you know, people believe that, but no, every community we talk to, every cultural community, every economic community, every part of the corridor, everyone really talked about this idea of opportunity and multi-generational planning and what they were going to do. And I do believe that we are at a moment where we have to create new solutions, that we do have to do exactly what you were describing earlier, is really understand the real, not just economic cost of racism, but the spiritual cost of racism to us all. And that we can begin to move forward in a way that does create opportunities for all communities to heal. There's some healing for us all to do. And again, this is our work together to move through this. So I think that those motivations and those intentions set us on a course for a vital future.
Thank you for that. I want to close with this question. I'm enthused by your vision, a vision that I would call healing for all sides in the race divide. And the Cultural Wellness Center has always been about healing mind, body, spirit. And it's right there in the name, wellness, the wellness of people and community and culture. I think it's important to talk about the work of Atum Azahir and all that she has done over the past 25 years, partnerships with Alina, developing programs for young and elders alike. It's an amazing body of work.
You know, you're absolutely right. And the foundation of that work was really related to healthcare and healing. I think that's the part that is really quite amazing. And you know, something that is interesting is that if we think about the Backyard Initiative, which was that original partnership between Alina and the Cultural Wellness Center, the Backyard Initiative in some regard was really Alina saying, we're going to be a good neighbor in our own backyard. Right, we're gonna look at our own backyard and see how we can make a difference. What is the role we play? What is the harm that we've done? What is the investment we're going to make? How do we bring our resources to bear to create a more vital future for our own backyard? And out of that came some amazing work. I think that one of those amazing pieces of work was this work where the Cultural Wellness Center was able to support the city of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota to change their definition of health to be more in line with the World Health Organization's definition of health, which, summing it up, simply, is that the greatest measure of health is connectedness. That isolation, segregation, right, is a detriment to health and well-being, and that many of the strategies that have been used over time, right, with marginalized community has been isolation, segregation, those things. That the Cultural Wellness Center always had an intersectional approach to what was well-being, right? But at the foundation of that was culture as an organizing and validating principle that connected people to others, right? That idea of connectedness again always plays up there. That it was intersectional and that it wasn't about avoiding disease. That it incorporated someone's housing and incorporated their relationships and their educational strategies and their economics. But it also, again, reached out and talked about their connection to family and those that they love. And in the end, food was not for just filling and nourishment and kind of those molecules of nutrients, that food itself was healing. Food was medicine. So developing a nutritional strategy that now has emerged as culinary heritage, opening a new business that is looking at the idea of culinary heritage based on the 5 ancient grains that are indigenous to Africa, and looking at this idea with culinary heritage. What we're doing is we're hoping to invite cultural chefs from around the world. And in Minneapolis, they all live here, so we don't have to go far. We can invite chefs from all over the world right down the street. And rather than us look at food as cultural food as What's cultural for African Americans is soul food, so it's grits and greens. What's cultural for people that are Latinx or from Mexico, wherever you want to pick in that part of the world, is tacos and tostada. You know, that's not it. That what is, you know, cultural for African people, East African, West African, Iranian, you know, Israeli, you know, what's cultural are the techniques that they use, which evolve out of their early cultural communities. It is the spices that are indigenous to where they live and when they cook, and the ways, the size, right? You know, of food and what we do that's cultural. So what we're asking them to do is bring those techniques and those spices and those ways of serving and savoring, and use these 5 ancient grains, and let's cook cultural food. Bring your culinary heritage to these ingredients, and let's create together. And it will be healthy. That's the other thing, is that we're not going, there's health food and not health food. When you prepare from this culinary heritage perspective, within the ancient grains framework, and it is prepared with love and served in community, the food is healthy, right? You eat less when you are fed emotionally in a meal. So we really are, again, bringing ritual, not just to the preparation, but ritual to the consumption of the meal, that is what's nourishing, that is what's nurturing, and that is fundamentally why we need to eat.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for your time. And thank you for joining us. I'm Don Shelby, and we hope you'll be part of the dream